The gunshot that shattered the evening air missed Clara Whitmore by inches, embedding itself in the wooden post beside her head as she stood frozen on the dusty street of Prescott, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882. She had been walking back from the general store, her arms laden with packages, when the argument between two drunken miners had escalated into violence. Now she stood there, packages scattered at her feet, her whole body trembling as she realized how close death had come. A strong hand grabbed her shoulder and pulled her behind the safety of a water trough. Clara looked up into the face of her rescuer, a cowboy with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He positioned himself between her and the continuing altercation, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip, though he made no move to draw it. "Stay down," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made her obey without question. The town marshal arrived moments later, disarming the miners and hauling them away. The cowboy remained where he was until the street had cleared, then offered Clara his hand to help her up. She took it, noticing the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentleness with which he pulled her to her feet. "You hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with genuine concern. "No, I'm fine, thank you for." She gestured helplessly at the water trough at the space where she had been standing. "For pulling me out of the way." He nodded, already bending to gather her scattered packages. Clara watched him, this stranger who had probably saved her life, and felt something flutter in her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. She had no business feeling anything for anyone, not after what had happened in Denver. Not after her family had made it clear what they thought of her worth. "I'm Jake Morrison," he said, straightening up with her packages balanced in his arms. "I'll walk you wherever you're headed. Clara Whitmore, and that's not necessary, really." "Wasn't asking permission," he said, but there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth that softened the words. "Which way?" She pointed toward the boarding house at the edge of town, and they walked together in silence. Clara was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the way he positioned himself on the street side, the way his eyes constantly moved, watching for threats. She had been in Prescott for 3 weeks, working as a seamstress and trying to build a new life far away from the ruins of her old one. When they reached the boarding house, Jake set her packages on the porch and tipped his hat. "You be careful, Miss Whitmore. Town's been rough lately with all the mining disputes." "I will. Thank you again, Mr. Morrison." He turned to leave, and Clara felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. But he paused at the bottom of the steps and looked back at her. "You new to Prescott? 3 weeks now. Working?" "At Mrs. Henderson's dress shop on Cortez Street." He nodded slowly, as if filing away this information. "I'll be around if you need anything." Then he was gone, his long stride carrying him down the dusty street toward the row of saloons and hotels that made up Prescott's center. Clara gathered her packages and went inside, but she couldn't stop thinking about the cowboy with the gentle hands and protective instincts. Mrs. Edith Granger, the boarding house owner, was waiting in the parlor. She was a widow in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "That was Jake Morrison," she said without preamble. "Good man, works for the Double M Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Comes in twice a month for supplies and never causes trouble. He pulled me out of the way when those miners started shooting," Clara explained. Mrs. Granger's expression softened. "That sounds like Jake. Lost his wife and baby son to fever 5 years back. Hasn't looked at a woman since, from what I hear. Just works himself into the ground and keeps to himself." Clara felt a sharp sympathy for the cowboy, mixed with her own grief. She knew what it was like to lose everything, though her losses were different. "That's terribly sad." "Life out here can be hard," Mrs. Granger said, "but it can also give you a fresh start if you're willing to take it." Clara nodded and carried her packages upstairs to her small room. She set them on the narrow bed and went to the window, looking out at the town she was trying to make her home. Prescott sprawled across a valley surrounded by mountains, a territorial capital that drew miners, ranchers, merchants, and drifters. It was nothing like Denver, where she had grown up in a fine house with servants and expectations that had eventually crushed her spirit. She was the youngest of 5 children, the only girl, and her parents had made their fortune in banking. They had plans for Clara, plans that involved marrying her off to a business associate's son to cement important connections. Richard Pemberton had been handsome and charming in public, cruel and controlling in private. When Clara had tried to tell her mother about Richard's treatment during their courtship, about the way he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, about the vicious things he whispered when no one else could hear, her mother had dismissed her concerns. "Marriage requires sacrifice," her mother had said coldly. "You're being dramatic, as usual. Richard comes from a good family, and this union will benefit us all." When Clara had finally worked up the courage to break off the engagement 3 months before the wedding, her family's reaction had been swift and brutal. Her father had called her selfish and ungrateful. Her brothers had accused her of trying to ruin the family's reputation. Her mother had looked at her with pure disappointment and said the words that still echoed in Clara's mind every day. "You'll never be enough for anyone, Clara. Not pretty enough, not obedient enough, not worth the trouble you cause. Richard was your best chance and you threw it away." Clara had left Denver the next week with only the money she had saved from selling some jewelry, and the clothes she could fit in 2 bags. She had chosen Prescott because it was far enough away that her family wouldn't bother following her, big enough to offer work, and small enough that she might actually matter here. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the dress shop, had been kind enough to give Clara a chance despite her lack of references. The work was hard and the pay modest, but Clara found satisfaction in creating beautiful things with her hands. She had always been talented with a needle, though her mother had considered it an amusing hobby rather than a useful skill. Over the next few days, Clara found herself thinking about Jake Morrison more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was simply gratitude, that anyone would feel the same about someone who had potentially saved their life. But the truth was more complicated. There had been something in his eyes, a depth of understanding that suggested he knew what it was like to hurt. She felt drawn to that, to the possibility of being understood by someone who wouldn't judge her past. She saw him again on a Saturday morning when she was opening the dress shop for Mrs. Henderson, who was feeling poorly. Clara was struggling with the heavy wooden shutters when a shadow fell across her work. "Need a hand with those?" She turned to find Jake Morrison standing there, his hat in his hands, looking almost shy. Her heart did that strange flutter again, and she nodded. "Please, Mrs. Henderson usually has her son help, but he's gone to Phoenix for the week." Jake made quick work of the shutters, his strength evident in the ease with which he handled them. When he was done, he stood there on the boardwalk, turning his hat in his hands. "I was wondering," he began, then stopped. "That is, I wanted to. Would you have dinner with me tonight, at the hotel dining room?" Clara's immediate instinct was to refuse. She had come to Prescott to build a life on her own, not to become entangled with a man. But something in Jake's expression, a vulnerability beneath the weathered exterior, made her pause. He looked like a man taking a risk, and she understood that feeling all too well. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "What time?" 7, I'll come by your boarding house. 7 is perfect." A smile transformed his face, making him look younger despite the lines around his eyes. "I'll see you then, Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she said. "Please call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'm Jake." She watched him walk away, and only then did she realize she was smiling. Mrs. Henderson's shop girl, a chatty 16-year-old named Louisa, arrived for work and immediately noticed Clara's expression. "You look happy," Louisa observed. "Something good happen?" "Maybe," Clara said carefully. "A gentleman asked me to dinner." Louisa's eyes went wide. "Who? Tell me everything." Clara laughed and shook her head. "There's nothing to tell yet. Now let's get to work. Mrs. Henderson wants those 3 dresses finished by Monday." But all through the day, as Clara stitched hems and fitted bodices, she thought about the evening ahead. She felt nervous in a way she hadn't expected, a fluttery anticipation that was entirely different from the dread she had felt during her courtship with Richard. Jake Morrison seemed like a different kind of man entirely, one who asked rather than demanded, who offered help rather than control. When 7 o'clock arrived, Clara was wearing her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, with her dark hair pinned up in a style that was elegant without being fussy. Jake appeared at Mrs. Granger's door precisely on time, cleaned up and wearing what was clearly his Sunday best. He offered Clara his arm, and they walked together through Prescott's cooling evening air toward the hotel. The dining room was modest but respectable, with white tablecloths and decent food. Jake pulled out Clara's chair for her, a gesture that felt courteous rather than performative. They ordered roast chicken and vegetables, and then sat looking at each other across the table, the nervousness palpable between them. "I'm not good at this," Jake said finally. "Haven't courted anyone since my wife, and that was 9 years ago. Mrs. Granger told me about your loss," Clara said gently. "I'm sorry." He nodded, his jaw tightening briefly. "Sarah was good people, met her in Kansas before I came out here. We had one son, Daniel. He was 2 when the fever took them both." He paused, his hands flat on the table. "Been working ever since, trying not to think too much. But when I saw you on that street, when I pulled you to safety, something shifted. First time in 5 years, I felt like maybe there could be more to life than just getting through each day." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at his honesty. "I understand that feeling. I came here running from my own past. My family in Denver made it very clear that I was a disappointment to them. I was engaged to a man who seemed perfect on the surface, but was cruel when no one was watching. When I finally found the courage to break it off, my mother told me I'd never be enough for anyone, that I wasn't worth the trouble." Jake's expression darkened. "She was wrong." "Was she? I'm 23 years old, living in a boarding house, working as a seamstress. I have no family, no prospects, nothing to offer anyone." "You have yourself," Jake said firmly. "Your courage to leave a bad situation, your skill with a needle, which I hear is considerable from the ladies at the ranch. Your kindness, which I saw when you thanked me for something any decent person would have done. That's not nothing, Clara, that's everything." She stared at him, something cracking open inside her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that, had ever made her feel like her choices mattered, like she mattered. "You don't even know me." "Then let me," he said simply. "Let me know you. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just a chance." Their food arrived, giving Clara time to compose herself. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing more easily now that the initial awkwardness had passed. Jake told her about the Double M Ranch, where he worked as a foreman overseeing 30 cowboys and thousands of head of cattle. He described the landscape north of Prescott, the high meadows and pine forests that seemed impossible after the desert valleys. "Owner is a man named Marcus Montgomery," Jake explained. "He bought the land 10 years ago and built it from nothing. Fair man, treats his workers right. Pays decent and doesn't ask questions about where people came from, only cares about whether they do good work." "It sounds like a good place," Clara said. "It is. Been there 5 years now. Montgomery gave me the foreman job 3 years back, said I had a way with the men and the cattle both." He paused. "I've been saving money. Got a piece of land picked out about 5 miles from the main ranch, thinking about building something there eventually, maybe running my own small operation." Clara heard the dream in his voice and smiled. "You should do it." "Maybe," he said. "If I had a reason to." The weight of his words hung between them, and Clara felt herself blushing. They finished dinner and walked slowly back toward the boarding house, neither wanting the evening to end. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the dark sky. At Mrs. Granger's porch, Jake turned to Clara and took both her hands in his. "I want to see you again, as often as you'll let me. I know I'm just a cowboy without much polish, but I promise I'll treat you right. You'll never have to be afraid with me." Clara looked up into his face, seeing the sincerity there, the vulnerability. She thought about her mother's words about never being enough, and then she thought about what Jake had said. that she had herself and that was everything. Maybe it was time to start believing it. "I want to see you too," she said softly. "But Jake, I need to tell you something. I'm damaged in ways that might not be obvious. Richard, my former fiancé, he hurt me. Not just physically, though there was some of that, but he made me doubt myself, made me feel small and worthless. I'm still learning how to trust my own judgment. Sometimes I'll probably be difficult or scared for no reason you can see." Jake's grip on her hands tightened gently. "We all carry damage, Clara. What matters is whether we let it define us or whether we choose to heal. I'll be patient. And I'll never give you reason to fear me." She believed him. That was the remarkable thing. After everything with Richard, after all the ways her family had let her down, she believed this cowboy she barely knew. Maybe it was foolish, but standing there in the starlight with her hands in his, Clara decided to take the risk. "Sundays are my only full day off," she said. "Would you like to spend tomorrow together?" "I'd like nothing better," Jake said. "I'll pick you up at 9. Bring a riding skirt if you have one. Want to show you something." They said goodnight, and Clara went inside feeling lighter than she had in months. Mrs. Granger was in the kitchen making tea, and she gave Clara a knowing smile. "Jake Morrison is a good man," she said. "He'll treat you right." "I think so too," Clara admitted. "Is it crazy to feel this way so fast?" "Out here, we don't have the luxury of long courtships and formal rules," Mrs. Granger said pragmatically. "Life's too short and too hard. When you find someone good, you hold on to them. Just keep your head about you and your eyes open." Clara went to bed that night and dreamed of pine forests and starlight and a future she was afraid to want too much. Jake arrived the next morning driving a small buggy pulled by a calm mare. Clara had borrowed a riding skirt from Mrs. Granger and wore a simple white blouse with a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. Jake helped her into the buggy, his hand warm and steady on hers, and they set off north out of town. The landscape changed as they climbed in elevation, the scrubby desert giving way to grasslands and eventually to stands of ponderosa pine. The air was cooler here, scented with pine resin and wildflowers. Jake drove with easy confidence, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. "That's where we have our summer camp," he said, indicating a high meadow. "Move the cattle up here when it gets too hot down below. The grass is better, and there's plenty of water from the mountain streams." They drove for about an hour before Jake turned off the main road onto a barely visible track that wound through the pines. Clara held onto the side of the buggy as they bounced over rough ground, until suddenly the trees opened up onto the most beautiful spot she had ever seen. It was a small valley, maybe 40 acres, cupped between pine-covered hills. A stream ran through the center, its water crystal clear over smooth stones. The meadow was thick with grass and flowers, and beyond it, the view opened up to show mountain ranges stretching to the horizon. A few aspen trees clustered near the stream, their leaves shimmering silver in the breeze. "This is my land," Jake said quietly. "Bought it 2 years ago, been paying it off bit by bit. Figured I'd build a house right there where those big pines are. Have the stream for water, shelter from the wind, good grazing for horses and a few cattle." Clara climbed down from the buggy and walked into the meadow, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. It was perfect, the kind of place people dreamed about but rarely found. "It's beautiful, Jake." "Really beautiful." He came to stand beside her and she could feel his nervousness. "I know it's too soon to be saying this, but I want to be honest with you. I brought you here because I wanted you to see it, wanted to know what you thought. Because if this thing between us becomes what I hope it might, this would be our home. I need to know if you could be happy here." Clara's breath caught. They had known each other for less than a week, had spent one evening together, and here he was showing her the land where he planned to build his future. It should have felt presumptuous or rushed, but instead it felt right. Jake wasn't playing games or hiding his intentions. He was laying his cards on the table and asking her to do the same. "I could be happy here," she said honestly, "but Jake, we barely know each other." "Then let's fix that," he said. "Tell me everything. I want to know who Clara Whitmore really is." They spread a blanket under the pines and unpacked the lunch Jake had brought: bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apples. As they ate, Clara found herself telling him everything. About growing up in Denver as the only daughter, always feeling like she didn't quite fit the mold her parents wanted. About her love of books and her talent for sewing, interests her mother had considered frivolous. About meeting Richard and the slow realization that the man she was engaged to was not the man he pretended to be in public. "He never hit me hard enough to leave marks that would show," she said, surprised at how steady her voice was. "He was too smart for that, but he'd grab my arm until it bruised under my sleeves. He'd whisper terrible things about how stupid I was, how lucky I was that he was willing to marry me despite my flaws. And when I tried to tell my mother, she acted like I was making it up for attention." Jake's hands had clenched into fists, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. "How long were you engaged to him?" 8 months. The wedding was 3 months away when I finally broke it off. It took me that long to believe that what I was feeling, my fear and unhappiness, was more important than my family's plans." She looked down at her hands. They were furious. "Said I was selfish and dramatic. My mother told me I'd never be enough for anyone, that I wasn't worth the trouble I caused. My father said I was no longer welcome in their home, so I left." "They were wrong," Jake said fiercely. "All of them. You were brave to leave both Richard and your family. That takes more strength than most people have." "I don't feel brave," Clara admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm barely holding myself together. I wake up scared that I made the wrong choice, that my mother was right." Jake reached over and took her hand. "Look at me, Clara." She did, meeting his stormy gray eyes. "You are enough. You're more than enough. You're smart and talented and brave as hell. The fact that you survived all that and still have the courage to take a chance on me proves it." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. "I want to believe you." "Then do," he said simply. "Believe me when I say you're worth everything good this life has to offer." She leaned into him, and his arms came around her, holding her while she cried out years of hurt and doubt. He didn't try to quiet her or tell her to stop. He just held her, one hand stroking her back, murmuring quiet reassurances. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed and red-eyed, he handed her his bandana and smiled at her. "Feel better?" "Actually, yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "I'm sorry, that wasn't very romantic." "Yes, it was," Jake said. "Real romance isn't just the pretty moments. It's being there for the hard ones too. It's being trusted with someone's pain." Clara looked at this cowboy who seemed to understand things her family never had, and felt something shift inside her. She was falling for him, fast and hard, and for the first time in her life it didn't feel like a trap, it felt like flying. "Tell me about Sarah," she said. "Your wife, I want to know about her." Jake's expression grew distant but not closed off. "Met her at a church social in Topeka. She was the preacher's daughter, pretty as a picture and twice as sweet. We courted for 6 months before I worked up the courage to propose. Got married in the spring of 1873, had Daniel a year later. He was the best thing that ever happened to us, all bright eyes and laughter." He paused and Clara waited, giving him space for the difficult part. "The fever came through in the summer of 77, took out half the town, seemed like. Sarah got sick first, then Daniel. I sat with them for days, trying to get the fever to break, but it just got worse. Sarah made me promise to keep living, to not give up. She died holding my hand. Daniel went 3 days later. He was calling for his mama at the end, and I couldn't give her to him." Clara's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Jake." "I kept my promise to Sarah," he said. "I kept living. But it was just going through the motions for a long time. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Came out to Arizona territory because I needed to be somewhere different, somewhere that didn't have their ghosts on every corner. Found the double M and threw myself into the work. It helped, gave me purpose. But I was still just existing, not really alive." He looked at her. "Until I pulled you behind that water trough and looked into your eyes. Something woke up in me then, something I thought was dead." "I felt it too," Clara whispered. "Like recognizing something I'd been looking for without knowing it." They sat together in the meadow as the afternoon wore on, talking about everything and nothing. Jake told her about his childhood on a small farm in Missouri, about learning to ride and rope from his father. Clara talked about the books she loved, the stories that had given her hope during difficult times. They discovered shared loves: coffee at dawn, thunderstorms, the smell of pine trees, the satisfaction of a job well done. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Jake drove Clara back to Prescott. At the boarding house, he helped her down from the buggy and held her hand for a long moment. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it's too soon to say it, but I've never been good at pretending. You should know where I stand." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Every instinct from her past screamed at her to be careful, to protect herself, to run before she got hurt again. But louder than those frightened voices was a new one, brave and clear, telling her that Jake Morrison was nothing like Richard Pemberton. That real love was supposed to feel like this: safe and exciting all at once, grounded and soaring, terrifying and perfect. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and Clara felt the last walls around her heart begin to crumble. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Court you proper," Jake said. "Do this right. But I want you to know my intentions are serious. I want a future with you, Clara, whatever that looks like, however long it takes for you to be ready." "I want that too," she said. "But Jake, I need to go slow. I need time to be sure I'm making choices for the right reasons, not just running from the past." "However slow you need," he promised. "I'll wait." Over the next 3 months, Jake courted Clara with a steady devotion that amazed her. He came to town every Sunday, and they spent the days together exploring the countryside around Prescott. He brought her wildflowers and books he thought she'd like. He introduced her to his friends at the Double M, good men who clearly respected Jake and treated Clara with courtesy. Marcus Montgomery, the ranch owner, was a gruff man in his 50s with kind eyes. He invited Clara to dinner at the ranch house one Sunday, where his wife Martha fussed over her and asked about her work at the dress shop. "Jake's been different these past months," Marcus told Clara as they sat on the porch after dinner watching the sunset. "Lighter somehow, more himself than he's been since I've known him. That's down to you." "He's made me different too," Clara admitted. "Helped me remember who I am, who I was before people told me I wasn't enough." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "We all need someone who sees us clear. Martha did that for me 30 years ago when I was just a drifter with big ideas and no money. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Now look at us." He gestured at the sprawling ranch, the comfortable house, the life they'd built. "It gives me hope," Clara said softly. As summer turned to fall, Clara found her confidence growing. The work at the dress shop went well, and Mrs. Henderson promoted her to manager, giving her more responsibility and better pay. She made friends in Prescott, women who welcomed her without judgment and men who treated her with respect. The territory was rough around the edges, but it was also full of people who understood second chances because they'd needed them too. Jake was patient, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give, but their relationship deepened naturally, inevitably. They learned each other's rhythms and moods. Clara discovered that Jake was quietly funny, with a dry wit that caught her by surprise. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, stubborn when it mattered, and prone to worrying about things beyond her control. In October, they had their first real argument. Jake had mentioned in passing that he'd been in a fight at a saloon the night before, breaking up a dispute that had gotten out of hand. Clara had felt sudden panic grip her, old fears rising up. "You could have been hurt," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "It was nothing serious," Jake said, confused by her reaction. "Just a couple of drunk minors. I've dealt with worse." "But you could have been hurt," Clara repeated, and then the words just spilled out. "Or killed. And then where would I be? I've let myself care about you depend on you. What happens when you're gone?" Jake had gone very still. Clara, I work on a ranch. There's danger in that. I could get thrown by a horse or kicked by a steer or caught in a storm. I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me. Nobody can promise that. I know, she said miserably. I know that logically, but emotionally I'm terrified. Everyone I've ever loved has either hurt me or left me. My parents chose their reputation over me. Richard treated me like property. Even my brothers, who I thought cared about me, sided with our parents. I can't lose you too, Jake. I can't. He crossed to her and took her by the shoulders, making her look at him. Listen to me. I won't promise I'll never be hurt or that nothing bad will ever happen. But I promise that as long as I'm breathing, I'll come back to you. I promise that I'll never hurt you on purpose, never make you feel small or worthless. I promise that I choose you every day no matter what. Can you trust that? Clara looked into his eyes and saw absolute sincerity. Slowly she nodded. I'm sorry, I know I'm being irrational. You're being human, Jake said gently. And you're healing from things that cut deep. I understand that. But Clara, you have to let me in all the way. You have to trust that I'm not Richard, that I'm not your family. I'm just a man who loves you and wants to build a life with you. I do trust you, she said. I'm just scared. Then be scared, he said. But be scared with me, not of me. Let me help carry it. They worked through it, talking late into the evening in Mrs. Granger's parlor. Clara explained about Richard, about the ways he had used her fears against her, making her feel like she was overreacting when her instincts told her something was wrong. Jake listened and understood, and they found their way back to solid ground. After that night, something shifted. Clara felt more secure in their relationship, less afraid that it would all fall apart. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could really work. In November, Jake asked Clara to marry him. They were back at his land, watching the first snow of the season dust the peaks above them. He had built a small cabin there, working on weekends and evenings, preparing for the future he wanted. It was simple, just 2 rooms, but sturdy and well-made. He'd brought Clara up to see it, and she had walked through it imagining what it could become. Curtains at the windows, a rug on the floor, a table where they could share meals. It's not much yet, Jake said, watching her anxiously, but it's a start. I've got money saved for furniture for whatever you'd want to add. Could build on more rooms as we need them. Clara turned to him, her heart in her throat. Jake Morrison, are you asking me something? He dropped to one knee right there in the unfinished cabin, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy but clearly chosen with care. Clara Whitmore, I know we've only known each other 6 months. I know you came here running from hurt, and I know you're still healing, but I love you with everything I am. You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me? Clara looked down at him, this good man offering her everything, and felt tears stream down her face. But these were different tears than the ones she'd shed in that meadow 6 months ago. These were tears of joy, of release, of finally believing that maybe she was enough after all. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the empty cabin that would become their home. When he set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I'll spend every day earning this, he promised. Every day making sure you know you're loved. You already do, Clara said, touching his face. You already do. They were married 3 weeks later on a cold December day in 1882 in the small church in Prescott. Martha Montgomery helped Clara make her wedding dress, a simple cream silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Granger cried through the whole ceremony. Marcus Montgomery stood up as Jake's best man, and Louisa from the dress shop served as Clara's maid of honor. Clara had written to her family in Denver, telling them about Jake and inviting them to the wedding. She hadn't really expected them to come, but some small part of her had hoped they might. When the day arrived with no word from Denver, Clara felt a familiar ache but also a sense of acceptance. She was making her own family now. As she stood at the altar looking into Jake's eyes, Clara thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain and the fear, the courage to leave and the strength to stay. And she thought about her mother's words, "You'll never be enough for anyone." The preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, and in the silence that followed, Clara heard her own voice clear and sure saying, "I do." Everyone looked confused until Jake squeezed her hand and smiled, understanding. "I object," Clara said louder, "to every lie I was ever told about my worth. I object to the idea that I'm not enough. Because standing here with this man, I finally understand that I was always enough. I was enough when I left Denver. I was enough when I came to Prescott alone. I was enough every single day, even when I didn't believe it. And Jake didn't make me enough. He just helped me see what was already true." The church was silent for a moment, and then Martha Montgomery started clapping. Soon everyone was applauding, and Clara was crying and laughing at the same time. Jake pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "You're more than I deserve, Clara Morrison, but I'll spend my life trying to deserve you." The preacher, smiling, said, "Well, now that that's settled, let's proceed with the vows." They spoke the traditional words, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges ahead. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Clara thoroughly, and the small congregation cheered. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and dancing and more joy than Clara had known was possible. She danced with Jake until her feet hurt, and then she danced some more. When Marcus Montgomery proposed a toast, raising his glass high, Clara felt surrounded by love and acceptance in a way she never had before. "To Jake and Clara," Marcus said, "two people who found each other when they needed it most. May your life together be filled with all the happiness you both deserve." "To Jake and Clara," everyone echoed, and Clara leaned into her husband, marveling at how that word felt. Husband, hers, partner, home. They spent their wedding night at Jake's cabin, which Martha and some of the ranch wives had transformed with rugs and curtains, and a real bed with a quilt. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the snow falling outside made everything feel like a dream. Jake carried Clara over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, he set her down gently and just looked at her for a long moment. "I'm nervous," he admitted. "It's been a long time for me, and I want this to be good for you." Clara appreciated his honesty, though she was nervous too. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Richard, we were engaged but never intimate. He would touch me sometimes in ways that felt wrong, that made me uncomfortable. But he was saving his rights for after we were married," he said. "Made it sound like something I should dread." Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice was gentle. "This isn't about rights or obligations, Clara. This is about two people who love each other choosing to be close. If you want to wait, we'll wait. If you want to go slow, we'll go slow. You're in control here. Always." The care in his words, the way he put her comfort first, made Clara love him even more. "I don't want to wait," she said. "I want to be your wife in every way. I just needed you to know." "Thank you for telling me," Jake said, and then he kissed her slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to change her mind. But Clara didn't want to change her mind. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to claim this piece of her life that Richard had tried to poison. Jake was gentle and patient, making sure Clara felt safe and cherished. It was nothing like the angry, groping Richard had subjected her to. This was tender and mutual, an exploration rather than a taking. When Clara gasped with unexpected pleasure, Jake smiled against her skin and murmured, "That's right, love. This is supposed to feel good for both of us." Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilt, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Clara felt different, claimed in the best possible way. She was someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's choice, and more importantly, she had chosen this. Chosen him, chosen herself. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Jake said, pulling her closer. "Every part of you. The strong parts and the scared parts, the happy parts and the hurt parts, all of you, Clara. Always." She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safer and more at peace than she ever had in her life. Life in the cabin took some adjustment. Clara had grown up with servants and later lived in a boarding house where meals were provided. Now she was responsible for cooking, cleaning, and managing a household, while also trying to continue her sewing work for extra money. Jake helped as much as he could, but his work on the ranch kept him busy from dawn until dusk most days. The first few months were hard. Clara burned more meals than she successfully cooked. The cabin was cold in the mornings despite the fire. Hauling water from the stream in winter was brutal work. There were times when Clara wondered if she had been foolish to think she could handle this life. But there were also moments of pure joy. Waking up next to Jake and watching him sleep in the gray dawn light. Riding together to check on the horses Jake was beginning to raise. Sitting by the fire in the evenings while Clara sewed and Jake read aloud from the newspaper. The slow, sweet discovery of each other's bodies and rhythms as they settled into married life. Marcus Montgomery was as good as his word about letting Jake develop his own small operation. Jake was allowed to run his own horses and cattle on Montgomery land in exchange for his work as foreman. It was an arrangement that benefited both men and gave Jake the chance to build something of his own. By spring, Clara had found her footing. She had learned to cook basic meals that were edible if not fancy. She had established a routine that included sewing work for several of the ranch wives, providing income while allowing her to work from home. She had made the cabin into a real home, with curtains she'd made herself, a herb garden starting to grow outside and touches of beauty that softened the rough edges. In April, Clara realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first she thought it was just stress or the change in her diet and activity level. But when another month passed with no sign of them, she began to suspect the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy at the thought of a baby, of expanding the family she and Jake were building. But also fear. Fear of childbirth, which killed so many women out here. Fear of losing a child like Jake had lost Daniel. Fear that she wouldn't be a good mother, that she'd repeat her own mother's mistakes. She waited until she was sure before telling Jake, and even then she wasn't sure how to say it. One evening in late May, as they were finishing dinner, she simply blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Jake's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, his face cycling through shock, joy, and then fear in rapid succession. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I've missed 2 courses and I've been sick in the mornings." He stood up and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands. "Clara, I don't even have words. I'm happy, so happy, but I'm also terrified." "Me too," she admitted. "After what happened to Sarah and Daniel, I understand if you're scared." "I am," Jake said honestly, "but Clara, we'll face this together. We'll get you to the best doctor, make sure you have everything you need. We'll prepare and plan and do everything we can to keep you and the baby safe." "What if something goes wrong?" Clara whispered. "Then we'll deal with it," Jake said firmly. "But we're not going to live in fear of what might happen. We're going to hope and plan for what we want to happen, a healthy baby and a healthy mother." Over the next months, Jake was true to his word. He took Clara to see Dr. Thornton in Prescott, a competent physician who examined her and pronounced her healthy and strong. He made sure she had plenty of good food and didn't work too hard. He fussed over her in ways that were both touching and occasionally irritating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Clara told him one day when he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know," Jake said, "but humor me. I couldn't do anything to save Sarah and Daniel. Let me do everything I can for you and this baby." His raw honesty melted her irritation. "All right. But Jake, you have to trust that I'll tell you if I need help. You can't hover over me every second." They found a balance, and Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Her belly grew round and full, and she felt the baby move inside her, tiny flutters that became strong kicks. Jake would lay his hand on her stomach in the evenings, marveling at the life they'd created. In September, Martha Montgomery insisted that Clara come stay at the ranch house for the last month of her pregnancy and the birth. "You're too far out in that cabin," she said firmly. "What if something happens in the middle of the night?" No, you'll stay here where we can keep an eye on you and fetch the doctor quickly if needed. Clara was grateful for the offer, though it was hard to leave the cabin she'd made home. Jake moved into the ranch bunkhouse so he could be close, and Clara settled into the comfortable guest room at the Montgomery house. The baby came on a cold October night in 1883, almost exactly a year after Jake had proposed. Clara's labor started in the evening and lasted through the night, hours of pain that left her exhausted and frightened. Dr. Thornton was there, calm and competent, and Martha held Clara's hand and talked her through the worst of it. "You're doing fine," Martha kept saying. "Strong girl." Almost there. When Jake was finally allowed in as dawn was breaking, Clara was holding a tiny, red-faced baby wrapped in a blanket. Jake stopped in the doorway, his face working with emotion. "It's a boy," Clara said, her voice hoarse from screaming but filled with joy. "Jake, we have a son." He crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect. Clara, you're amazing, thank you." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking. Would you mind if we called him Daniel, for my first son?" "He deserves to be remembered." Clara felt tears of her own. "Daniel Morrison, I think it's perfect." Little Daniel was healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs and an appetite to match. Clara recovered from the birth slowly but steadily, and within a few weeks they were able to return to the cabin. Life took on a new rhythm organized around the baby's needs. Feeding, changing, soothing, and the occasional precious moment when he slept and they could breathe. Clara had worried she wouldn't know how to be a mother, but she discovered that love made up for inexperience. She learned to read Daniel's different cries to anticipate his needs. Jake was a devoted father, walking the floor with Daniel when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, making faces to coax out the baby's first smiles. One evening when Daniel was 3 months old, Clara sat nursing him by the fire while Jake worked on repairing some tack. The cabin was warm and peaceful, and Clara felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked, noticing her expression. "That my mother was wrong," Clara said. "About everything, I am enough, I was always enough. And you, this life, Daniel, you're more than I ever dreamed I could have." Jake set aside his work and came to sit beside her on the floor, putting his arm around her shoulders. "You gave me back my life, Clara. When I met you, I was just going through the motions. Now every day matters because I get to spend it with you." They sat together watching their son, two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen healing over bitterness, hope over fear. The years that followed were full of the normal challenges and joys of frontier life. Jake continued building his horse operation, gaining a reputation for training excellent saddle horses. Clara's sewing skills became well known throughout the territory, and she took on special commissions for weddings and formal occasions. Daniel grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. In 1885, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Jake's first wife. Jake held the baby and cried, telling Clara that somehow it felt like both his wives were honored now, the one he'd lost and the one he'd been blessed to find. Sarah was a calm baby, easier than Daniel had been, with a sweet disposition that won everyone's heart. The cabin was expanded room by room. Jake proved to be a skilled carpenter, and with help from the men at the Double M, he added a proper kitchen, a separate bedroom for the children, and eventually a second story. What had started as a simple 2-room cabin became a real house, filled with the sounds of family life. Clara's relationship with her family in Denver remained complicated. She had written to them when Daniel was born, sending a photograph and extending an olive branch. Her father had written back a stiff letter acknowledging the birth, but making no apology for how they'd treated her. Her mother never wrote at all. It hurt, but Clara had learned to carry that hurt without letting it define her. She had a family now, one she'd chosen and built. The Montgomerys treated her like a daughter. The other ranch families included her in everything. She and Jake had created a community of love that didn't depend on blood ties. When Daniel was 4 and Sarah 2, Clara received word that her father had died of a heart attack. She made the journey to Denver for the funeral, bringing Jake and the children with her. It was the first time she'd been back since leaving 5 years earlier. Denver felt strange and foreign now, too crowded and formal after the open spaces of Arizona. Her brothers were polite but distant, and her mother looked at Clara with an expression that might have been regret but could also have been resentment. When Clara introduced her husband and children, her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "So this is what you chose instead of Richard Pemberton," her mother said. "Yes," Clara said clearly, "and I'd make the same choice every time." At the funeral reception, one of her brothers pulled her aside. Thomas was the closest to her in age, only 2 years older, and he looked uncomfortable. "Clara, I owe you an apology," he said. "We all do. You were right about Richard. He married a different woman a year after you left, and the stories that have come out since. He's been abusive to her. There are rumors of other women he hurt before you. We should have believed you." Clara felt vindication mix with sadness for Richard's current wife. Is she safe? Her family finally got her away from him last month. She's divorcing him, which is causing a scandal. Thomas looked at her seriously. "You were brave to leave when you did." "I'm sorry we made you feel like you were wrong." "Thank you for saying that," Clara said, and then, surprising herself, she added, "I forgive you." They talked for a while longer, and Thomas met Jake and was clearly impressed by the strong, steady man his sister had married. He played with Daniel and Sarah, seeming to genuinely enjoy his niece and nephew. When Clara and her family left Denver to return home, Thomas came to the train station to see them off. "Write to me," he said. "Tell me about your life. I'd like to know my sister again if you'll let me." Clara agreed, and over the years that followed, she and Thomas built a tentative but real relationship through letters. Her other brothers never reached out, and her mother remained cold until her death 3 years later. But that one relationship reclaimed felt like a gift. Life continued its forward motion. In 1888, Clara gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Mark, who kept everyone running with their energy and mischief. The house was expanded again to accommodate them. Jake's horse operation had grown successful enough that Marcus Montgomery offered him a full partnership in a new venture breeding and training horses specifically for the cavalry. "It's your expertise and reputation that will make this work," Marcus said. "You deserve to share in the profits, not just take a wage." Jake accepted, and suddenly their financial situation improved dramatically. They were able to pay off the last of the land debt, buy better breeding stock, and even hire a helper for Clara with the house and children. Daniel, their oldest, showed an early aptitude for working with horses like his father. He would follow Jake everywhere, imitating his movements and asking endless questions. Sarah was quieter but deeply thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded Clara of herself. The twins were wild and joyful, constantly getting into trouble but impossible to stay mad at. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December 1892, Jake took Clara back to the meadow where he'd proposed. It was winter again, snow covering the ground, but the place was as beautiful as ever. The cabin where they'd been married was now a substantial house, smoke rising from its chimneys, children's voices echoing inside. "Remember when this was just empty land and dreams?" Jake asked, holding Clara close. "I remember being terrified," Clara admitted. "Terrified that I was making another mistake, that you'd turn out to be like Richard, that my family was right about me. And now I know," Clara said firmly. "I know that I made the right choice, that you're the best thing that ever happened to me. That our life together is worth every hard moment it took to get here." Jake pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant shaped like a tiny house. "This represents everything we've built," he said, fastening it around her neck. "Not just the house, but the family, the love, the life. You're the foundation of it all, Clara. You're what makes this home." Clara touched the pendant, feeling tears well up. They told me I'd never be enough, she said, the words her mother had spoken 10 years ago finally losing their power. She cried, the cowboy said, "You're more than I deserve." Jake cupped her face in his hands. "You are more than I deserve, but I'm grateful every day that you chose me anyway." They kissed there in the snow, two people who had survived loss and pain and found each other on the other side. When they walked back to their house, their children came running to meet them, and Clara felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. The territory of Arizona became a state in 1912, and Clara and Jake celebrated by planting a tree in front of their house. Daniel grew up and married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, starting his own small ranch on land adjacent to theirs. Sarah became a teacher in Prescott, educated and independent, choosing to wait to marry until she found someone who respected her mind as much as her person. The twins left for adventures in California, but wrote letters full of stories that made Clara laugh. Jake's hair turned gray, and Clara developed lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun and smiling at her family. They grew old together, their love deepening into something comfortable and enduring. They still held hands when they walked. Jake still brought Clara wildflowers. She still mended his clothes and made his favorite meals. In 1920, when they had been married 38 years, Jake fell ill. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away and developed into pneumonia. Dr. Thornton had long since retired, but his replacement, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who had trained back east, did everything she could. For 2 weeks, Clara sat by Jake's bedside, holding his hand and willing him to fight. He rallied briefly one afternoon, his eyes clearing as he looked at her. Clara at 61 was still beautiful to him, her dark hair now silver but her eyes as bright as ever. "Clara," he whispered, "my Clara." "I'm here," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm right here." "Best thing I ever did," Jake said, his voice weak but clear, "was pull you behind that water trough. Changed my whole life in an instant." "You changed mine too," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "You taught me I was enough. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself." "You were always enough," Jake said. "Just took the right person to see it. Promise me something. Anything? Don't stop living when I'm gone. You've got years left and they should be good ones. Be happy, Clara. You deserve happy." "I promise," she whispered, though she couldn't imagine happiness without him. Jake died that evening as the sun was setting, peacefully in his sleep with Clara holding his hand. She sat with him for a long time after, remembering the 38 years they'd had together. The fears and the joys, the struggles and the triumphs. The 4 children and 8 grandchildren he'd left behind, the life they'd built from nothing but hope and determination. The funeral was held at their house, with what seemed like half of Arizona in attendance. Jake had been respected and loved, known for his fairness, his skill with horses, and his devotion to his family. People told stories about him that made Clara laugh through her tears. Daniel gave a eulogy that honored his father's memory while celebrating his life. After everyone left, Clara stood alone in front of the house, looking at the land Jake had bought 40 years earlier. The meadow where he'd proposed, the stream that still ran clear and cold, the mountains rising beyond. This place had been his dream, and he'd made it real through sheer will and hard work. Clara kept her promise to Jake. She didn't stop living. She continued her sewing, taught her granddaughters the skills she'd learned, wrote letters to her brother Thomas until his death in 1925. She spent summers with Daniel and Elizabeth, helping with their children. She visited Sarah in Prescott and marveled at her daughter's success as an educator. She even traveled to California to see the twins and meet their families, but she missed Jake every single day. Missed his quiet strength, his steady presence, the way he'd always made her feel safe and cherished. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, in the rocking chair Jake had made for her, and talk to him as if he were still there. "You'd be proud of Daniel," she'd say. "He's running the horse operation just like you did, training the finest animals in the territory. And Sarah," She's so smart, Jake. She's written a book about teaching methods that's being used in schools across the state. The twins are doing well too, both successful in their own ways. We did good with our children. Clara lived to be 82 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1941, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. When they laid her to rest beside Jake in the small cemetery on the ranch, Sarah read a letter they had found among Clara's things. It was a letter Clara had written to herself on her wedding day, sealed and marked not to be opened until her death. In it, she had written about her fears and hopes, her determination to make her marriage work, her gratitude for Jake's love. And at the end, she had written these words: "If I have lived a good life, if I have been happy, it will be because I had the courage to believe Jake when he said I was enough, because I chose to heal instead of hiding, because I took the risk of loving again after being hurt." May whoever reads this know that it's never too late to start over, that the opinions of those who don't value you don't define your worth, that real love exists, patient and kind and true. And that sometimes the best thing you can do is let yourself be loved by someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. The letter was passed around among Clara's descendants, becoming a family treasure. The house she and Jake had built remained in the family for generations, a testament to what could be created when two broken people chose to heal together. Years later, Clara's great-great-granddaughter would stand in that same meadow, now part of a protected family trust, and think about the woman who had fled Denver with nothing but courage and hope, who had been told she'd never be enough but had built a life that proved otherwise, who had found a cowboy willing to see her worth when she couldn't see it herself. The story of Clara and Jake became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The story of how he had pulled her to safety behind a water trough on a dusty street in Prescott. How they had fallen in love in a meadow surrounded by pines. How she had cried on their wedding day and declared her own worth. How he had told her she was more than he deserved, and she had spent 38 years proving him right. It was a love story born from pain but built on hope. A reminder that the right person doesn't complete you, but helps you become more fully yourself. That being enough is something you claim for yourself, not something someone else grants you. And that the greatest adventure is letting yourself be loved, truly and completely, by someone who sees all of you and stays anyway. The pendant Jake had given Clara on their 10th anniversary was passed down through the daughters of the family, each one receiving it on her wedding day with the instruction to remember what it represented. That home is not a place, but the people you love and the life you build with them. That worth is inherent, not earned. That courage and hope can transform everything. And in that meadow in Arizona, where pines still grew tall and a stream still ran clear, where the mountains rose majesty against the sky, the echoes of that love remained. A cowboy and a seamstress who had both been broken and had healed each other, who had created from nothing a legacy of love that would ripple forward through generations, who had proved that being enough was never about what others thought, but about having the courage to believe in your own worth and let yourself be loved. Clara Whitmore Morrison had fled Denver as a woman told she would never be enough. She had died in Arizona as a woman who knew with absolute certainty that she had always been more than enough, that her life had mattered, that her love had been real and lasting, that she had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of her past, and that the cowboy who had pulled her behind a water trough on a summer evening in 1882 had given her the greatest gift of all, not his love, though that was precious, but the reflection of herself through eyes that saw her truly. That helped her see her own worth. That let her become the woman she was always meant to be. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardships or the pain, but the love and the healing and the life they had created together. A life that started with a gunshot and a water trough, that deepened in a pine meadow, that was sealed with vows spoken in a small church, That grew through children and challenges and years of choosing each other every single day. That ended with two graves side by side and a legacy of descendants who carried their story forward. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.